Welcome to the 11th video of creating a matrix style animational widget. So the first thing that we want to do is look at what we'll be creating. So this is the final video, and at the end of this video we should have completed our matrix animational widget. So we're going to have two phrases and they're going to be converted back and forth. So let's have a look at what we will be doing today. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be creating our final if statement to check if the phrases have been completely transferred. We're going to, if that is yes, then we're going to resolve our promise. So remember, in the last video we created our promise and we binded that promise to an attribute. So that means that we can call that attribute anywhere in the program, and once that attribute is called, it means that our promise has been resolved. Then if our complete flag is not met, that means the animation hasn't been completely transferred. We're going to be using the JavaScript web API requestAnimationFrame, and that will tell the browser to say, look, here's some information, I want you to refresh this animation and change it with this new information. So we're going to be using that. We're going to be increasing our frame value, which is the value that allows us to track our progress. The last thing is we need to bind our animationFrame method, and this is because we need to bind this to an attribute, and this is because this requestAnimationFrame requires a callback function, and so we can't directly input a method into it. So we'll have to attach that to an attribute and use that attribute within our requestAnimationFrame. So that's the kind of things we're going to be doing. Let's get on with it. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to complete a completion if statement. So we're going to open up with JavaScript, and we're going to be doing our animational phrase here. Now what we want to do is we want to say, with this output here, under this output, we want to say if the complete flag, so remember this complete flag, which we are incrementing every time one of our phrase characters gets converted, we're going to say if this complete flag is equal to the all data length, which means this array that we've put all the characters in, then we know that it is complete. So once we know it is complete, we can then resolve our promise. So what we just need to do there is to resolve our promise. Underneath it, we just need to call that promise attribute here. Now that declares that this promise has been resolved, and then when it's returned to our then function, that means that once that promise is returned, it will carry this out because that promise has been successful. So we've actually resolved our promise here. Now we need to do is complete this if statement to say, well, if it's not completed, we need to refresh our animation with the changes that we've made. So we're going to add an else to this if statement. So we're saying that if it's not complete, we are going to refresh the animation using the requestAnimationFrame. So what this does is this sends it to the web API, and this tells the web API that we're going to update the animation. So I'm going to just use the Windows requestAnimationFrame, and this again is, if we go online, this is a method tells the browser that you wish to perform an animation and requests that the browser calls a specific function to update an animation before the next repaint. So it's just telling the browser to update it. Importantly, the argument that it requires is a single argument. Yes, so it's a callback function, but it needs to be a single argument. So we can't just insert the method directly. We have to bind it to an attribute and then insert it. So that's what we need to do. So we've added our animational loop, or we've added the requestAnimationFrame. We haven't looped it to our animationFrame just yet, because we need to bind it to our animational method. Now to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it at the top. So because it's an attribute, I'm going to just put it at the top, and what this is doing is it's using this bind method to bind it to this attribute. So I'm just saying, like, with this animational phrase method, I'm binding it to this attribute, which means that we will now able to put it as our single argument. So if we go back here, I'm just going to copy this down and I'm going to insert it here. So what we've done now is we've completed this this task, and we've completed this task. The only thing that we need to do now is make sure that when this callback method is done, we increase that increment that frame to track our progress. Yeah, so remember that this is done even though this is called before it, because it's a callback loop, the order is slightly different. So this will still happen even though this code is before, and that is because of the way that JavaScript executes certain web API code. Again, if you're confused about that, really should look at the event loop, and I'll attach the video at the end. So that should be everything. So let's save it all and see if the plugin works. Okay, so let's have a look. If I go on to the dashboard and I look at the plugin setting, we have the matrix title, and let's activate it. If we go to the appearance in the widget, it's the matrix widget here. We have three phrases. So let's say, welcome to the matrix. Do you want to take the red pill or the blue pill? And we'll save that. So the title 3 isn't being saved, so we need to have a look at that. But let's make sure that the rest are working. Okay, so it's at the front end, it's working between the two. Let's make sure that if we change the one of the titles to hello to goodbye, let's make sure it changes here. Okay, so that changes. So now we need to just look at why that phase 3 isn't working. So if we go back, because it's the phase 3, I'm going to be looking at the widget side. Okay, so I can see why. So in the form we have for a phase 3, but we don't have it in the widget, and we don't have it in the update one. So what we'll need to do is we're going to just add in the phase 3. So if you want to add more phrases in, we need to make sure it's in all of them. So we have phase 3 here, making sure that matches up perfect. And then we need to make sure that here, and make another if statement. I'm just going to say if we don't know what it is, let's say is the third phrase, and we need to make sure that that matches up, and that matches up, and then we need to make sure that we push that third one onto the array. So let's save that, and let's see if that can now update. Okay, so if we go online, we've got the hello, we've got the goodbye, we've got this is the third phrase. I don't know why I put a question mark. So if we change it now to yay and we save it, let's see what happens at the front end. We've got the hello, the goodbye, and the yay. Okay, so that's done it. We've got everything working, and that's our widget, both front end and back end, as well as that plugin. So well done. Let's have a look at some of the concept checking questions now. Okay, so the questions that I want you to answer is what does the requestAnimationFrame do? Why must we bind the animationFrame method to an attribute? Why must we bind the animationFrame method to an attribute so we can call it in the requestAnimationFrame? What did we do so that we can resolve the promise in a different method to the declared promise? So this is we did it in a very interesting and different way to how normal promises work. And then what extra improvements can you do to improve the plugin? Okay, so try and stop the video and answer these questions. Okay, so the animational frame, or the request animational frame, this is a thing that tells the browser that you wish to do an animation. So remember, we use the output, the DOM output, to change our information in the box, and then we use the request animational frame to tell them that we want to refresh that, and then we need to make sure that the argument that we insert, the single argument that we insert, points to the next the method that we will use to change that information again. So do remember that if you want to do a continuous animation, it needs to have this loop where it keeps requesting an animational frame change, and then once you get to where you want to get to, then you break that using some kind of code. Why must we bind the animationFrame method to an attribute? Well, we don't have to, but we should. So let me show you what else we could do instead of binding it. Okay, so what we cannot do is we cannot just leave this animationFrame there because the computer will not realize what we need to call. However, because we have the object here that we've created, we could say, I want you to call the matrix.animationFrame. So we could say, this is what you're going to be calling. However, if you do that, we can get rid of this. However, if we do that, and let's say later on something is changed here and the object is changed, then this will not work and the plugin will not work. So again, if we save it, let's just make sure it does work. Yeah, see it's still working there. But it's not great because if something gets changed, it could stop the plugin. However, if you bind it, if you bind it to an attribute here, and this attribute is binded here, no matter what you put here, this will still work. This will always be bounded to this attribute, and then we can always use this phrase. So again, you don't have to bind it like that. You could make sure that you're calling the object and then the method, but I do not think that's the best way. I think it's better to bind it to that attribute and then use it. So why can we resolve, or how can we resolve the promise in a different location to the declared promise? So remember, in our code we had a .then in our front end widget that says this is what you're going to do if the promise is resolved, and then what happens is that we had declared our promise inside our first method, but then we declared the fulfillment of that promise within a separate method. So the promise was all over the place, which is not normally how promises are written. The way that we did this is because we had managed to attach this resolve condition to this attribute, and then we attached this attribute, or we had to declare this attribute before we returned that promise. So because our .then, we were calling a method, and before we use the .then, we have to make sure we return the promise so that .then can see whether that promise has been fulfilled. And then within that section of creating that promise and returning that promise, we must declare that whether it's been success or whether it's been a failure. So we need to make sure that it's declared within that section. Lastly, what extra improvements can we make to the plugin? Well, let's do it from the easy to the more difficult. So if you're interested in adding more phrases, I think this is quite an easy challenge. If you want to add an option to change the speed, I think it's a little bit more difficult, but still fairly easy. Change the code so the animation only starts when you click on the title. That's quite a good one for you to experiment. And then create an airport mode and a matrix mode. So I thought potentially you can use the same animation to create an airport widget where it's one of those boards that show and display the airport information that flickers through until it finds the right letter for your destination. So I thought maybe you could have an airport mode which the pictures and a completely different style, and then you can also have a matrix mode, and you could do that maybe in the front, the back end, to switch between those modes. So I would be really interested to see how you add or improve to the plugin. Be reminded that the information, all the code, the finished ones, can be found in the GitHub from the link below. So you're welcome to kind of take that code and then experiment it any way you can. If there are any good ones, leave a comment, and I would love to have a look at what you've created. Additionally, feel free to like the video and subscribe so I can know that you're enjoying them and I can add and create more videos. So thank you very much, and that's the end of our Matrix plugin.